Hey guys, welcome back to How the Light Gets In. For our first video today, I want to talk about what's in your backpack. Something I probably should let you know now. I really like metaphor, so you're going to get a lot of that from me. So to start out this topic, I kind of want to tell you this story. About a year ago, a friend of ours invited my boyfriend Michael and I to go backpacking in the mountains in Wyoming. And I fully realized that I don't look like the kind of person who goes backpacking in the mountains, and that's because I am not. However, I did. So the thing about backpacking is that the stuff you need to survive in the middle of nowhere for 3 full days is really expensive. So we found a way to kind of borrow some stuff and buy the rest and, meet all of our gear needs in the interim there. So among the things we were borrowing were the actual backpacks. And these are not like the thing you bought in 4th grade to go to elementary school backpacks. These are like giant 65-liter external frame packs that you can fit your whole life into for a few days or weeks, depending on how committed you are to space saving. So we didn't have those. We were buying a lot of stuff to put in them, but we didn't actually have it. So at some point on this journey, while we were purchasing all this stuff, and figuring out how this was going to work and picking our itinerary and looking at the spots we were going to be camping and all that, Michael, my boyfriend, sent an email to our friend Jake, who had invited us, and just said, hey man, so we're buying all this stuff and I'm getting worried that it's not going to fit into the backpacks. And Jake replied a little bit later and said, well, if it doesn't fit, then you don't need it. And being the metaphor junkie that I am, and constantly looking for new and different ways to think about everything, that email really stuck with me. Like, it might be one of the best emails I've ever received, because it's true. Like, if it didn't fit, then we weren't going to need it. And I think you can apply that to the way that you think about the world and your life and yourself too. Stuff winds up in our backpacks, and because it's been there so long, we kind of stop paying attention to it and we don't notice. Because we learn how to think about the world and how to think about ourselves and how to think about other people from our caretakers when we're very young. I mean, that starts before we have memories, before we can really think or speak or move independently. People are teaching us what we can expect and how we should feel and what we should think. And that stuff gets ingrained and it gets worked into us, and it comes out in everything that we do and everything that we think, and in our relationships and our ambition and our goals, and it's everywhere. But the thing that we don't tend to do is we don't tend to actually go through those backpacks and take an inventory of all of those things that we've been taught to think and feel and believe. And I think it's really important to look at what's in your backpack. And by that I mean, how do you feel about yourself? What do you think is important about you and to you? What do you expect in your relationships? What do you expect from strangers? How do you feel like you should be treating people? All of that stuff is incredibly important, and I think if most people actually thought about it, they would realize that they didn't have a particularly positive view of a lot of those things. And those negative views don't come from us. I think I spend probably 60% of my in-session time with people who use phrases like, I'm a garbage person, I'm a dumpster fire, I'm disgusting, I'm terrible, I don't deserve love. And the thing that always trips me up is that I'll ask them why, and it's a question that they've never thought to apply to themselves before. They've never questioned why they have those beliefs about themselves, and they don't know where it came from. And the answer to that is basically that it didn't probably come from you. It came from someone outside you, and you just accepted it because you were, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and you don't really think to tell an adult that they're wrong about stuff when you're that age. So I think it's important to go through and really look at what's been given to you. I think a really good example of how this can happen is actually from a study that this anthropologist did. Her name is Tanya Lerman, and what she and her group of anthropologists did is they interviewed patients with paranoid schizophrenia across 3 different countries. So she interviewed paranoid schizophrenics from the United States, Africa, and India. And what she found is that across those cultural lines, people experience schizophrenia in very different ways. So if you're not super familiar with what paranoid schizophrenia is, it encompasses a lot of things, but the primary features are delusional thinking and hallucinations. And hallucinations are, seeing or hearing or even smelling or touching things that aren't really there. In clinical language, we refer to it as responding to internal stimuli, because it's not happening outside of you, but you're experiencing it as if it is. So the big thing that this study showed is that in the United States, people who have auditory hallucinations, people who hear voices, they don't know who those voices belong to, they don't have relationships with those voices, and those voices tend to say really terrible, violent, negative things. So in the past, when I've worked with people who had this disorder, they've reported to me that their voices are telling them that they're worthless, their voices are telling them to kill themselves, their voices are telling them to kill others, their voices are telling them that, the government is watching, or aliens are watching, or someone's out to get you. All of this stuff that I think you can probably tell is going to make it really, really hard to ever be at any sort of peace with yourself or with your life or with your world. Now, on the flip side of that, people in Africa and India who suffer from the exact same disorder have a very, very different experience of those auditory hallucinations. People in those places were more likely to know who their voices belong to and have relationships with their voices. In fact, a lot of people experience those voices as, communing with God or talking to their ancestors. And as a result of the relationships that they've built with those voices, they don't hear that negative, terrible stuff. Instead, it's neutral or positive. It's outside of you forces saying, hey, way to go, good job, or we believe in you, or, other positive things. And I think you can see how someone suffering from paranoid schizophrenia in the United States has a phenomenally more difficult experience with that disorder than someone in these other places has, because they have been able to form these relationships and connect those dots and come to, a sense of, peace and collaboration with those voices. So what this has to do with you, if you don't happen to be suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, is that we all kind of have voices in our head. There's an important distinction here, because I've had kids tell me that they hear voices before, and then after we've talked about it a little bit, they've realized that those are just thoughts in my head, because it's not the same thing. And we all kind of have, if you're paying attention, there are a lot of different parts of your brain communicating with you at any point in time. And I think it's really important for you to pay attention to that and to try and label those voices. A really common clinical term is referencing your inner critic, which is the voice in your head that tells you you're garbage and can't do anything. It's a really unhelpful voice, and I've been known from time to time to refer to the inner critic as a bad case of asshole brain, because I think that's a much more apt description of what's going on there. But if you pay attention to all those different parts, all those different pieces of your brain thinking and telling you different things and recommending courses of action and parsing out all these events that you've been through in your life, you'll notice that they have different tones. They have different conceptualizations of who you are as a person. And some of those voices and some of those thoughts are going to be worth listening to, and some of them aren't. And the ones that aren't worth listening to are probably the ones that someone else has put in your backpack. It's important to pay attention to the thoughts in your head. And that can get really overwhelming, because your brain's literal job is to generate thoughts. So at least for me, because I do have anxiety, I cope with, the way I always put it is that I have it in a given time about 87 different browser tabs open in my brain, just thinking about different stuff. Right now I'm actively shooting this video and I'm talking about the thoughts in our heads, but I'm also kind of thinking about how I need to do laundry when I get home because we're out of clean towels, and reminding myself that I need to get an oil change next week. And I'm also kind of wondering why my mom said that weird thing to me a couple weeks ago. It's all happening at once. I'm prioritizing this, obviously, but there's stuff in the background. But I think it's important to try and get in the habit of paying attention to that. I was in a training class several years ago, and the guy who was teaching the class was talking about observing your own thoughts and how it can be difficult and it can be overwhelming. And the way that he put it, which to me is the best way it's ever been put, is that You know, your thoughts are like a train, and you can sit down and you can watch the train go by. Just try not to get on the train. Focus on observing your thoughts. Pay attention to what they tell you about you and what they tell you about how you see yourself, and think about whether or not that's helpful or unhelpful. At some point, I'm going to do a video about, positive affirmations and negative thinking and all that. But just as a little preview to that, know that I don't frame things positive and negative when it comes to thoughts, at least when I'm paying attention. Instead, I like to put it in terms of helpful and unhelpful, because that's a lot easier way to kind of parse those out and make them work for you in the way that you need to. So I guess the big takeaway from all of this is just that your thoughts are not you, and they're not in control of you. They're going to happen, and they're not always going to be the best thought ever or the most helpful thought ever, and they're not always going to be the worst thought ever. But you do have control over which one of those thoughts you listen to, and what thoughts control your behavior, and what thoughts you use to make your decision. So pay attention. Give those thoughts names when you recognize that they're different parts of your brain. Give those thoughts attributes so that you know which ones are on your side and which ones just straight up aren't. And when you start catching lines of thinking that have nothing to do with you and aren't how you want to think about you or your life or the people in it, you can put those aside. You can argue back with that voice and say, thanks for your input, but that's really not helpful to me right now. The more you do that, the more you get in the habit of paying attention and arguing and debating those voices, the less likely they are to have any actual influence on you. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate you being here. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you think I'm wrong, you can leave those in the comments here, or you can find me on Twitter at hgtlivids, or you can email me at howthelightgetsinvids@gmail.com. Like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your enemies, and hit that little bell so you know when we drop new videos. Thanks so much.